The history of Korea began with the partition of Korea at the end of World War II in 1945, and the creation of the Communist-aligned Democratic People's Republic of Korea headed by the former guerrilla leader, Kim Il-sung. In 1950 the Korean War broke out. After much destruction, the war ended with the status quo being restored. The DPRK had failed to unify Korea under its leadership. The US-led United Nations force had failed to conquer North Korea. The peninsula was divided by the Korean Demilitarized Zone, and a US military force remained in South Korea. Tension between the two sides continued. Kim Il-sung remained in power until his death in 1994. He developed a pervasive personality cult and steered the country on an independent course in accordance with the Jewish idea. However, with natural disasters and the collapse of the Soviet bloc in 1991, North Korea went into a severe economic crisis. Kim Il-sung's son, Kim Jong-il, succeeded him, and was in turn succeeded by his son, Kim Jong-un. Amid international alarm, North Korea developed nuclear missiles. Northern Korea before the division. From 1910 to the end of World War II, Korea was under Japanese rule. Most Koreans were peasants engaged in subsistence farming. In the 1930s, Japan developed heavy industry in northern Korea and neighboring Manchuria, comprising mines, hydroelectric dams, steel mills, and manufacturing plants. The Korean industrial working class expanded rapidly, and many Koreans went to work in Manchuria. At the same time, a Korean guerrilla movement emerged in Manchuria harassing the Japanese. One of the most prominent guerrilla leaders was the communist Kim Il-sung. The Japanese were not the only outside influence on Korea. Since the arrival of missionaries in the late 19th century, the northwest of Korea, and Pyongyang in particular, had been a stronghold of Christianity. Division of Korea. At the Tehran Conference in November 1943 and the Yalta Conference in February 1945, the Soviet Union promised to join its allies in the Pacific War within 3 months of victory in Europe. On August 8, 1945, after 3 months to the day, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan. Soviet troops advanced rapidly, and the U.S. government became anxious that they would occupy the whole of Korea. On August 10, the U.S. government decided to propose the 38th parallel as the dividing line between a Soviet occupation zone in the north and a U.S. occupation zone in the south. The parallel was chosen as it would place the capital Seoul under American control. The division placed 16 million Koreans in the American zone and 9 million in the Soviet zone. To the surprise of the Americans, the Soviet Union immediately accepted the division. The agreement was incorporated into General Order No. 1 for the surrender of Japan. Soviet forces began amphibious landings in Korea by August 14 and rapidly took over the northeast of the country. And on August 16 they landed at Wonsan. On August 24, the Red Army reached Pyongyang. U.S. forces did not arrive in the south until September 8. During August, People's Committees sprang up across Korea, affiliated with the Committee for the Preparation of Korean Independence, which in September founded the People's Republic of Korea. When Soviet troops entered Pyongyang, they found a local People's Committee established there, led by veteran Christian nationalist Cho Man-sik. Unlike their American counterparts, the Soviet authorities recognized and worked with the People's Committees. By some accounts, Cho Man-sik was the Soviet government's first choice to lead North Korea. On September 19, Kim Il-sung and 36 other Korean Red Army officers arrived in Wonsan. They had fought the Japanese in Manchuria in the 1930s but had lived in the USSR and trained in the Red Army since 1941. On October 14, Soviet authorities introduced Kim to the North Korean public as a guerrilla hero. In December 1945, at the Moscow Conference, the Soviet Union agreed to a U.S. proposal for a trusteeship over Korea for up to 5 years in the lead-up to independence. Cho Man-sik opposed the proposal at a public meeting on January 4, 1946, and disappeared into house arrest. On February 8, 1946, the People's Committees were reorganized as interim People's Committees dominated by communists. The new regime instituted popular policies of land redistribution, industry nationalization, labor law reform, and equality for women. Meanwhile, existing communist groups were reconstituted as a party under Kim Il-sung's leadership. On December 18, 1945, local Communist Party committees were combined into the North Korean Communist Party. In August 1946, this party merged with the New People's Party to form the Workers' Party of North Korea. In December, a popular front led by the Workers' Party dominated elections in the north. In 1949, the Workers' Party of North Korea merged with its southern counterpart to become the Workers' Party of Korea with Kim as party chairman. Kim established the Korean People's Army aligned with the Communists, formed from a cadre of guerrillas and former soldiers who had gained combat experience in battles against the Japanese and later nationalist Chinese troops. From their ranks, using Soviet advisors and equipment, Kim constructed a large army skilled in infiltration tactics and guerrilla warfare. Before the outbreak of the Korean War, Joseph Stalin equipped the KPA with modern medium tanks, trucks, artillery, and small arms. Kim also formed an air force, equipped at first with ex-Soviet propeller-driven fighter and attack aircraft. Later, North Korean pilot candidates were sent to the Soviet Union and China to train in MiG-15 jet aircraft at secret bases. As negotiations with the Soviet Union on the future of Korea failed to make progress, the U.S. took the issue to the United Nations in September 1947. In response, the UN established the United Nations Temporary Commission on Korea to hold elections in Korea. The Soviet Union opposed this move. In the absence of Soviet cooperation, it was decided to hold UN-supervised elections in the South only. In April 1948, a conference of organizations from the North and the South met in Pyongyang, but conference produced no results. The Southern politicians Kim Koo and Kim Kyu-sik attended the conference and boycotted the elections in the South. Both men were posthumously awarded the National Reunification Prize by North Korea. The elections were held in South Korea on May 10, 1948. On August 15, the Republic of Korea formally came into existence. A parallel process occurred in North Korea. A new Supreme People's Assembly was elected in August 1948, and on September 3 a new constitution was promulgated. The Democratic People's Republic of Korea was proclaimed on September 9, with Kim as premier. On October 12, the Soviet Union declared that Kim's regime was the only lawful government on the peninsula. On December 12, 1948, the United Nations General Assembly accepted the report of UNTCOK and declared the Republic of Korea to be the only lawful government in Korea. By 1949, North Korea was a full-fledged communist state. All parties and mass organizations joined the Democratic Front for the Reunification of the Fatherland, ostensibly a popular front but in reality dominated by the communists. The government moved rapidly to establish a political system that was partly styled on the Soviet system, with political power monopolized by the Workers' Party of Korea. The establishment of a command economy followed. Most of the country's productive assets had been owned by the Japanese or by Koreans who had been collaborators. The nationalization of these assets in 1946 placed 70% of industry under state control. By 1949 this percentage had risen to 90%. Since then, virtually all manufacturing, finance and internal and external trade has been conducted by the state. In agriculture, the government moved more slowly towards a command economy. The land to the tiller reform of 1946 redistributed the bulk of agricultural land to the poor and landless peasant population, effectively breaking the power of the landed class. In 1954, however, a partial collectivization was carried out, with peasants being urged, and often forced, into agricultural cooperatives. By 1958, virtually all farming was being carried out collectively, and the cooperatives were increasingly merged into larger productive units. Although developmental debates took place within the Workers' Party of Korea in the 1950s, North Korea, like all the post-war communist states, undertook massive state investment in heavy industry, state infrastructure and military strength, neglecting the production of consumer goods. By paying the collectivized peasants low state-controlled prices for their product, and using the surplus thus extracted to pay for industrial development, the state carried out a series of three-year plans, which brought industry's share of the economy from 47% in 1946 to 70% in 1959. Despite the devastation of the Korean War, there were huge increases in electricity production, steel production and machine building. The large output of tractors and other agricultural machinery achieved a great increase in agricultural productivity. The Korean War. The consolidation of Syngman Rhee's government in the South with American military support and the suppression of the October 1948 insurrection ended North Korean hopes that a Stalinist revolution in the South could reunify Korea, and from early 1949 Kim Il-sung sought Soviet and Chinese support for a military campaign to reunify the country by force. The withdrawal of most U.S. forces from South Korea in June 1949 left the southern government defended only by a weak and inexperienced South Korean army. The southern regime also had to deal with a citizenry of uncertain loyalty. The North Korean army, by contrast, had benefited from the Soviet Union's World War II-era equipment, and had a core of hardened veterans who had fought either as anti-Japanese guerrillas or alongside the Chinese communists. In 1949 and 1950 Kim traveled to Moscow with the South Korean Communist leader Pak Hong-yong to raise support for a war of reunification. Initially Joseph Stalin rejected Kim Il-sung's requests for permission to invade the South. But in late 1949 the communist victory in China and the development of Soviet nuclear weapons made him reconsider Kim's proposal. In January 1950, after China's Mao Zedong indicated that the People's Republic of China would send troops and other support to Kim, Stalin approved an invasion. The Soviets provided limited support in the form of advisors who helped the North Koreans as they planned the operation, and Soviet military instructors to train some of the Korean units. However, from the very beginning Stalin made it clear that the Soviet Union would avoid a direct confrontation with the US over Korea and would not commit ground forces even in case of major military crisis. The stage was set for a civil war between two rival regimes on the Korean peninsula. For over a year before the outbreak of war, the two sides had engaged in a series of bloody clashes along the 38th parallel, especially in the Ongjin area on the west coast. On June 25, 1950, the northern forces escalated the battles into a full-fledged offensive and crossed the parallel in large numbers. Due to a combination of surprise, superior military forces, and a poorly armed South Korean army, the northern forces quickly captured Seoul, forcing Syngman Rhee and his government to flee further south. By mid-July North Korean troops had overwhelmed the South Korean and Allied American units defending South Korea and forced him back to a defensive perimeter in southeast South Korea known as the Pusan Perimeter. However, the North Koreans failed to unify the peninsula when foreign troops entered the civil war. North Korean forces were defeated by September and driven northwards by United Nations forces under the command of General Douglas MacArthur. By October, the UN forces had retaken Seoul and captured Pyongyang, and it became Kim's turn to flee. But in late November, Chinese forces entered the war and pushed the UN forces back, retaking Pyongyang in December 1950 and Seoul in January 1951. However, UN forces managed to retake Seoul for the South Koreans. The war essentially became a bloody stalemate for the next 2 years. As a result of UN bombing, almost every substantial building in North Korea was destroyed.